I just want to thank the analysts for joining us. It's always great to be engaged with the analyst community. I have a history of going back to my analyst relations days when I was at Sienna and did market analysis for them, but I engaged with the industry analysts then. Was at light reading, heavy reading, actually being an analyst, and then I have that role also within Mplify. But what I'd like to do is welcome each of the analysts and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, say a word about their role and their focus and why, basically why they've come to this event. And maybe if we could start with Camille and just kind of work down the line, that'd be great.
Hi everyone, I'm Camille Mendler. I work for a company called Omdia, and I'm a research director, and I run our telco B2B organization. We help service providers around the world make money from large and small enterprises, and we love wholesale, next generation wholesale. And my team is on a mission, what we call the $1 trillion mission. We think that's what telco B2B should be worth. We're a few $100 billion short, and I'd like to change that. And in my neck of the woods, my personal research currently looks at neo-clouds, and I'm also doing a lot of work, advisory with clients on network sovereignty, not digital sovereignty, network sovereignty, because that is the cool bit. That is the bit that will make money. Okay, that's enough about me.
Thanks. Hi everyone, James Ibish of IDC. So I run our European Enterprise Communication Services research, and what that is we research the market for fixed line enterprise network services in Europe and globally as well, of course. So our audience, our clients are mainly service providers, but also vendors, basically industry organizations. So I cover all the things that you would expect from that. So that's SD-WAN, NAS, cloud connectivity, managed services. We had a bit of talk about X25. We actually forecasted the X25 market until relatively recently, and we still forecast the frame and ATM market. So if you need legacy market forecasts, then come to us. I look at services rather than operations or technology, so I look at things very much from the enterprise perspective, and kind of that's my take on this. So it's really fascinating to hear the industry side out as I'm looking at the kind of enterprise side in. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Cameron, and I'm Managing Director of Research at STL Partners, so bit smaller than the others, and so I have a wider portfolio looking at across all of the solution areas where we research. And most of what STL looks at is innovation and growth opportunities for telecoms operators. So we work with service providers and looking at what can you guys do above and beyond the core? What are the new services that you can break into where you can generate revenues from? So I think, on a similar mission to Camille in terms of where that new money comes from. Lately, a lot of what we've been looking at in this domain has to do with how operators can move up the stack with generative AI. Of course, providing that foundational layer of infrastructure is part of the story, but what else can you do on top, and how that's going to evolve. So yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Joseph Atwood. I'm a senior analyst at Analysys Mason, and I lead our NAS platforms and infrastructure program. So as it says in the tin, we focus on networks as a service, so looking at what service providers are offering in this space and how the market is evolving. My other research areas include quantum safe networking, GPU as a service, so looking at that from a hyperscaler, neocloud and telecoms operator perspective, as well as a telco cloud, so looking at 5G, core and RAN networks.
Thanks. And I'm Dean Bubley. I run my own advisory company, Disruptive Analysis. I'm an industry analyst and futurist, and I work with service providers, vendors, regulators and policymakers, and sometimes investors and others as well. And I cover a very broad swathe of the telecoms and tech sector, really from sort of 5G and 6G wireless to networks for AI, AI for networks, AI for regulators, and vice versa, as well as out as far as satellite, one direction, subsea the other, and things to do with edge, cloud, and various other things that catch my eye. Spending quite a bit of time on AI and voice blended together, and the renaissance of voice services. And then in particular, and similar to Camille, I'm spending a lot of time on sovereignty issues, and in particular the idea of the telecoms industry defining its own frameworks and priorities for what sovereignty means, rather than being sort of dragged along in the wake of the so-called digital, I hate that word, so-called digital and even critical infrastructure and chips sovereignty packages. What does it mean for telcos, whether it's at infrastructure level, services and solutions, or integrated stacks, and hopefully come back on that.
Okay, great. Thank you all. So one of the things I had asked all of them during our preparation discussion was to consider maybe a couple, 2 or 3 key takeaways from the event. Maybe if I could start with the enterprise angle here, James. Maybe we could start with you, 1 or 2, or maybe 3 key takeaways that you have from the days so far, and then maybe we could just work down the line, come back to
sure.
Cami.
Well, I've actually got 4, so I'm going to take someone else's time. So, I mean, the first one obviously is, AI is the kind of driving topic. It's kind of, really so taking over from what I would characterize as a sort of slightly more amorphous use case or driver of NAS that we've seen up until date. So sort of, just generally talking about flexibility and agility and scalability. So AI, I think, really gives NAS a lot of focus and an identity that it hasn't quite had before. So with that in mind, I'd look at service providers taking that to market and positioning NAS really as the sort of default network for AI. So that's a big takeaway, and can talk more about NAS and how that's kind of being taken to market a bit later. Also related to AI, in the early days of AI, and still now, but a little less so, it's been largely about kind of automating or making cheaper or making quicker things that we already do, so making existing things better. But the real opportunity, the far future, is about AI doing things that we can't even see now, so creating things that don't exist now and that we can't imagine. So to forgive the phrase, but the unknown unknowns. And what I liked about what Pascal said, how Mplify is working with that in mind, is that it's not a straight path from where we are now to where we can see ourselves being in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. And the way that Mplify works in terms of short sprints, very agile way, zigzagging, rather than taking a straight line from here to there, I thought was a really realistic and kind of pragmatic approach to this, because we don't know what things are going to be like in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Another one quickly on federated NAS is, again, I liked hearing from Mplify that it's not going to get in the way between buyers and sellers and act as the intermediary. And I thought that was a point that was only made over a couple of minutes, but I think it's a very significant point. Because you don't want to compete with members. What Mplify is trying to do is create a sort of open-ended environment in which commerce and AI and so on can take place. So I think that was quite a significant point. And then the last one of the things that I see as most important when I talk to a lot of enterprises and what they want from service providers is the issue of trust and relationship being very often more important than technology or cost or portfolio or capabilities. So we hear this time and time again, and there's a very clear correlation between service providers that treat their customers very well, and we hear this from the customers, and so have very long-standing relationships, very high levels of trust, competence, and so on, are doing better than companies that simply compete on cost or the latest technology. So I would like to see that kind of idea of trust and relationship and quality of relationship really built in to the ways that Mplify is kind of building the technology up as well. Those are my 4 points. Thank you.
Very
good. That's a great thing that you say that trust is really important, because for me, my light bulb moment that I've had today came in the last final sessions when it's clear how quickly the agentic capabilities are evolving and how easily customers are going to be able or are able to find out where is the service, how much does it cost, when can I provision it, who's going to offer it to me. And you pair that together with the sort of federated digital twin view that Mplify is talking about. And that question we had just up there on the poll about ecosystem coordination between partners being the biggest challenge that you have, you can foresee a future where the enterprises that are advanced and develop their own agents, who needs a coordinated ecosystem? They can go and find out from all of the different on-net players what is available. Where can I buy it? Can I just buy it cheaper rather than having to have someone surface it to me and organize that orchestration? Let my agent do it for me, and I'll organize it via my agent. And you can foresee, with the capabilities that are coming, that future where enterprises have so much more control. And I think that makes the point that David from Lumen was making really salient about you want to be the platform that enables that kind of innovation rather than the record label. But it also means, that it makes it much harder for everyone to compete, because it does, obviously you're competing on some things. I think, what Daniela was saying, if you have a new route, then that might differentiate you. There's lots of different ways to differentiate, but the enterprises still care more about the relationship. Is going to be really, really important that you have that relationship to counteract what the technology is going to be able to do. Because at the end of the day, if enterprises are letting their agents make some of those decisions on their behalf, those agents don't care about relationships.
Great, thank you.
Can I just go into that one just a little bit? This idea of agentic AI and moving very quickly, you can find out where your services. I'm just thinking about the demos that you might see around this, and I just pulled together a few notes here and think about the traditional approach when it comes to NAS, right? Your intent might be, I need a 10 gig Ethernet connection in our Dallas data center, in our AWS Direct Connect location in Ashburn. I need it by a certain date. I need it with 99.99 availability, low latency, in a 12-month term, right? So that might be what you would plug into the request, right? But going forward, maybe it's we're deploying a real-time fraud detection model. The workload must process inference requests within a certain number of milliseconds for 95% of our transactions, keep the data regulated within the US, support burst traffic, and recommend configuration, latency zones, and things like that. So it's almost like you're going to have to start educating the enterprise on what the prompt is going to look like, maybe, right? What do you think?
It's actually the other way around. We are speaking the language of 5 nines in the telecom industry. The enterprise wants outcomes and they'll pay for it. And I can tell you in the private networking space, there are lots of SIs out there already offering that. I will deploy this network for you. I will increase the load in your mine, what you extract, and I'll take X percentage of the value that you've created. Those types of deals only happen when you have fully automated, fully transparent, real-time systems. And it's not about the language of 5 nines.
Yeah, cool. So I'd just like to echo some of the points that James and Amy have said, basically. So it's really exciting to see the importance of AI to this NAS ecosystem. I think that one thing that perhaps wasn't mentioned today was that this is a world of known unknowns. So we know that AI is getting more distributed. We know that there's going to be more AI agents, but we don't know the extent of those questions. And we also don't know what the traffic profile of these AI agents is going to look like. So it's going to be really important for enterprises to have a flexible solution that enables them to provision a network that can meet these unknown needs. So that's why NAS is going to be absolutely central to what enterprises do in the AI space in the future. I think it's also very interesting to see about how AI agents can be applied to network as a service, because obviously self-service has been absolutely central to NAS from the very beginning. So having AI agents seems as a natural evolution. And I also like the fact that we see a presentation from NTT Docomo about looking at the multi-agent architectures, how we can have a reusable framework. So some of these implementation details that are going to be really critical for making AI agents deliver real value to users in terms of reducing complexity, streamlining time to outcomes, rather than AI agents just being a gimmick. So actually we need to be thinking more about how we implement AI agents to actually deliver value to customers. And I think the final thing that I'd like to say is that, you can see by the state of this room with a lot of attendees that NAS is becoming much more commonplace. So 5 years ago, an operator could differentiate itself purely by offering self-service NAS with on-demand capabilities. Now, I think, as Stan said, there's about 50 companies that say they can do this. So just offering NAS isn't the differentiator it once was. So service providers need to find other ways to win customers. So I think one way they might be doing this is AI agents. As always, you've got traditional network breadth and reach. But yeah, I think we need to be thinking more about how NAS providers can continue to differentiate their services in order to increase the revenues.
Okay. Okay, so I've got good news and bad news. I'd say there's two things where I've been really, really impressed and surprised, and two where I think there's a bit more work that might need to be done. Let's give the good news first. Really, really glad to see how mature MCP is. So I wrote about that first time about a year ago, and I was like, oh, I think the telecoms industry needs to pay attention to this. And it's now real, looks like it's in production. And I would also say that Mplify is probably ahead of pretty much every other telecom organization or group that I come across. There's work being done at good stuff at Etsy and TM Forum and others, but I think just the sheer volume of MCP commentary today has been impressive. I was really, really pleased to see the panel with the internet exchanges, DKIX and NAMSIX and Links, because I think the interconnect and peering is overlooked by almost the entire telecoms industry, especially when it comes to things like AI or talking about latency and that sort of interconnect piece. Really good to see that being embraced within this community. Two things I think perhaps need a little bit more depth on. Sovereignty, the question I asked before, and was saying the sort of understanding what's going on in Brussels and Washington and London and Tokyo and Ottawa and places. I think there is a policy dimension to this, and I think that it's really important that even if you're on the technology side, you understand what's coming down the line from a regulatory or legal point of view, and sort of whether that sort of pulls you in the right direction or whether you end up being pulled along by it somewhere else. The other one I would say, edge inference, huge opportunity, but I really think that it's important to double click on what inference is, and in particular the sort of low latency inference that can be put as a workload in one place versus things like reasoning and agentic, where again the interconnection part of it becomes more important because the agents may well need access to everything else on the internet and cloud. And actually then it becomes more the edge interconnect rather than the edge compute function. Otherwise there's a risk of repeating all the stuff we had about 10 years ago with mobile edge computing and MEC. I was joking at lunchtime that I could probably pull out a report 10 years ago and just do a search and replace of MEC with edge inference, and it'll be pretty good to go. So I think there's some risks there. But overall, I'd say it's so far been really impressive.
Yeah, very, very good comments. Thank you all. So one of the things we heard from Scott, and that was the title of his presentation, it was the AI arms, what was it? The arms race, right? And so if you think about the AI arms race and the comments that James and Joseph, well, I think you both agreed that NAS is the default network for AI. Do you think that the service providers, well, maybe you could just comment on the service provider's ability to engage and meet the requirements, in that type of environment, right? What do you think are some of the best innovations that are taking place, and what do you think are some of the needs around it?
Well, I would actually just take a couple of steps back, because one of the things that struck me is that, and this is, to be fair, this isn't a place to talk about it in great depth, but when you look at the industry and the market as a whole, a lot of companies that we speak to are not using NAS yet. They're not sold on the idea, they're wary of it, they don't see a need for it. Not so much the leading edge companies, but the majority of companies that are sort of outside the leading edge, and there are different types of enterprises that we talk to, including the leading edge ones, that act more like service providers than enterprises. So they don't need any help. They're kind of in control of their own destiny. They kind of know exactly what they're doing and have the funding and investment for it. But then you've got the companies at the other end of the spectrum, the lagging companies. They are typically under enormous budget pressure. They don't have a holistic, coherent network strategy. They're buying isolated services. They maybe have a thin overlay on top. In many cases, they're buying the cheapest managed service they could find, and they're not having a good time. So there's more companies, I think, in that basket than I tend to hear the industry admit. And we know that because we go out and talk to them, so we get a kind of random sampling and find these companies. They're not buying NAS. They don't really understand it. So I think taking those couple of steps back, I would say it's as important to educate the market and really gain that. Again, it comes back to trust and relationship. Telling customers what NAS can do and how it can solve their problems and deliver outcomes, not just technical specs, as it is about developing leading edge, kind of very, very advanced, very impressive use cases. Different segments of the market need different approaches, basically.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, the NAS providers aren't fully capturing the opportunity yet. I mean, I think a lot of the interest we've seen in the AI traffic so far has been data center interconnects, but a lot of when it's hyperscalers using that and they're buying dark fiber or installing their own fiber, so NAS providers haven't really been able to capture that opportunity so far. And then outside of that, I think NAS providers are mainly focused on north-south connectivity, so connecting enterprise sites and offices to data centers, rather than the east-west connectivity that's going to be a bigger part of the typical enterprise's AI workloads. So, I mean, it's still very nascent for NAS providers to capture this opportunity, but I don't really see any reason why they can't.
Yeah, very good points.
I would also just sort of add to that in terms of getting those enterprises on. Some of what we found in some recent research into like embracing NAS is it's not just about being able to offer that on-demand service and pricing, but it's also being able to sort of bring the customers with you by, offering a greater degree of observability. How is that network performing? What is it doing for you? Sort of helping them to make that connection between how the network is performing and what's happening in their day-to-day workloads. And I think that that's something that, we've heard very little about today, but that is still really important to help bring those sort of enterprises on board with NAS.
And just to add to that, I mean, one in 7 out of 10 large enterprises will make tweaks to their supplier lineup, their digital supplier lineup, in the next buying cycle. And the reasons that they change are not about price, they're about experience, they're about service transparency, they're about control, they're about observability, but they're not necessarily about self-service. And it's not necessarily about on-demand. And a lot of you out there are throwing in some NAS capabilities in the deal, hoping people take it up, and they don't necessarily do that. But I think there is a lot we can do to talk about that experience and access to statistics and build trust partly in that way. But be assured, it's not all about that self-service on-demand piece yet.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And also we find, from the conversations we have with enterprises that reporting, visibility, observability is possibly the biggest pain point or challenge that companies have when they're managing their networks. So it's not all about just going out to buy a fully managed service and sort of totally hands-off. I think those days are gone. It's not just about running your own network, although some companies do that and have the resources. It's about having the tools to be able to see what the network is doing and what the service provider is doing on the network and what you as the customer can change and affect, what effect that's going to have, how long it's going to take, and so on. So yeah, definitely.
Well, one thing I haven't heard much about today is internal use within service provider groups where they've got multiple business units, multiple opcos. You've got the AI factory team over here. You've got the enterprise group there, the defense and public services team here, about how they can use for their AI, either workloads or in some cases infrastructure, their internal assets as well as those of alternative service providers as well.
Yeah, very good points. So I had several thoughts listening to your comments here. One was a conversation back at ITW talked to a multinational enterprise, tens of thousands of employees around the world, global network needs, and I asked the head of their connectivity, are you being pitched network as a service? And they're familiar from the, with our community. They come from this space and they just joined the organization. They said no one is approaching us with a network as a service offering, and it's just standard connectivity, which I was like blown away. I mean, this is a company with huge needs. So that's one thought. The other one is the observability. This came up in a conversation yesterday in our leadership discussion. Observability was a huge emphasis from the multinational enterprise that spoke there. And then another comment, which I wanted to get your thoughts on here, is the comment was, I don't want to use AI if I don't have to, because it's very, 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 very expensive. There's two very varies, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Are we just throwing like brute force, right now at AI and burning up a lot of tokens? And can the service providers, or are service providers starting to think about how they can help the enterprises be more efficient with this? What do you think, Dean?
It depends on which customers and which operators. I mean, some operators are trying to sort of start talking about acting as token factories, and maybe we can sell voice tokens or T-Mobile US kinetic tokens. No, me neither. And on the other hand, you've also got ones that are much more oriented towards creating line of business solutions. So I'm thinking sort of Vion in sort of Central Asia and bits of Europe that's actually looking at creating its own vertical applications, but are based on AI. It's got its own AI sort of factory as well as data centers. So there's a real spectrum of what are service providers doing for enterprises and also consumers as well today.
I mean, I think honestly, one of the best industry examples I would point at is Orange. They have a live intelligence platform, which is built on their own internal AI platform, which has 100,000 users on it, and they are doing exactly what Dean is saying. A little bit classier than eat your own dog food is drink your own champagne or drink your own orange juice, actually, I think is the official line. But that is, they've gone through a lot of the pain of AI is expensive. Let's find out what's the most, cost-effective AI in which scenario. And they may not be doing like world's most advanced AI capabilities. It's helping sales teams with, appending, summaries to CRM systems and stuff like that. But it's actually things that lots of enterprises need to do, and they don't want to find out the expensive way of doing it. They want to find out the cheap and easy way of doing it. And I think that's a great example of an operator that is, leveraging its size and reach and capability to try and lower the barriers to entry for some customers, and they are getting enterprise customers on this. So, we'll see if it stands the test of time. But over the last couple of years that they've been developing it, it's looking so far pretty good.
Yeah, great comments. Anyone else?
Just on your point about AI, NAS not being pitched to customers, I mean, I think we might forget it being in this room with NAS enthusiasts, but it's very early days. I think only a small portion of operators' fixed connectivity revenues comes from network as a service. So I think we need to acknowledge the fact it's going to take time, both for awareness to increase from an enterprise perspective, and also for the sales organisations to be built in NAS providers to ensure that customers are willing to use NAS. From my end, I think one thing I see holding them back is that to make the most of NAS, enterprises really need to undergo a transformation. So although we talk about self-service portals, a lot of the benefits from NAS will come from using it, consuming it via APIs. And to be able to do that, you need to have a transformation in your enterprise. So you've got to change your buying behaviours. You've got to put these APIs in front of your systems so they can consume connectivity in this on-demand manner. So actually making the most of NAS from an enterprise perspective is going to take some work, and obviously that's going to take some time.
Also, there's kind of one of the problems plaguing NAS has been the multiplicity of definitions. So vendors and service providers and enterprises of different types mean different things by NAS and have done for a long time. I think the kind of overall concept of NAS is coalescing or converging, but even today there's a kind of spectrum of flavors or types of NAS going from just simple on-demand services that can be kind of ordered via Portal API and managed in that way, up to what, and I didn't get his name, my apologies. The Lumen guy was talking about making the analogy with the music industry and saying, the service provider shouldn't be the label or the distributors. Effectively, what we're kind of aiming for and working towards is back in network terms, not music terms, is a sort of open-ended, universally accessible, liquid, programmable fabric, which has kind of always been the ultimate aim of networks, not to be just individual or isolated point-to-point product sales, but something that's a resource that's available to customers when they need it. But that's also NAS. So the operators working on their NAS platforms as opposed to NAS products, so things like Global Fabric and Evolution Platform are going in that direction. Others are going in the product direction. So there's still this kind of confusion about what NAS actually means. So coming back to the point about education, I think we still need that.
Yeah, David talked about that composable surface, which I don't know. I don't know if I've ever heard that term before, but yeah, that was pretty cool. So we have about 3 minutes left. Would anyone in the audience like to ask our esteemed analysts a question? Fahim?
So I'd like to pick up on a point that both Camille and Dean made. So obviously in Europe, sovereignty is a massive topic compared to across the pond where it's less important. Besides trying to get a handle on how we present sovereignty towards enterprises, how do we actually manage that from a wholesale point of view? What do we need to do, in your opinion?
Well, number one, we need to understand the different layers of sovereignty and put a price according to that. There's a difference between a fully air-gapped network and having some control over routing that you might be able to exert, all right? So I think there are different layers of sovereignty with an associated price. I think we need to have a greater understanding of, I think there's a marketing problem. You may or may not be aware, but enterprises, some enterprises even understand the concept of network sovereignty. There's no single definition. We recently spoke to large enterprises, large multinational enterprises, and we found just under 1 in 5 had already implemented some policy around network sovereignty, routing and things like that. Now, those large enterprises demographically represent 0.1%, 0.2% of the total demographics of the B2B universe. They're maybe 30 to 40% of the spend, so we shouldn't ignore them. They spend big. But unless we get that right, that's a problem. And just briefly, I was at an event with KPN and their partner talking about sovereignty in Amsterdam. And I was the only person who mentioned network sovereignty. They were talking about digital sovereignty. So let's, for goodness sake, not forget who we are and what we do and why it's important. So that's what wholesale's job is to talk about that fabric. And, in the words of Olivia Newton-John, we need to let's get physical about it, yeah? The underlay.
I would say that when you talk to people about sovereignty, you end up with discussions that end up talking about layers or frameworks of whether it's operational sovereignty, which is where are the keys in particular, but jurisdictional, who owns something, who is allowed to do something, where is data based. It might be who is allowed to own things in some places. The supply chain sovereignty, both for hardware and software, of either who makes it and where does it come from, or can we replace it if we can't get it tomorrow? And the sort of, is there an off switch in Beijing or Washington or somewhere else? There's a perception. And that applies whether it's to wholesale or to access networks. I think there's some specific things around wholesale networks, particularly anything to do with subsea, anything to do with satellite, anything cross-border obviously has a whole sort of surface there of multi-jurisdictional issues. And I sort of also would say that there's almost like an ideological difference between sovereignty in the EU versus markets like UK and Canada and maybe Japan. EU very much is focused on strategic autonomy and what can we have which is a European-based solution, ideally with the European provider and even European citizens managing it, whereas Canada and UK and others are much more focused on security and resilience of saying, does this fit these criteria for resiliency standards? Is it certified? Is it gone through a lab? So it's less about who produces it and more about what happens if it goes wrong.
Thank you.
Great. Frank.
Hello. Thanks for your insight, first of all. I would like to come back to your point, Amy, that you did about the fact that if we put that as an available marketplace, you name it, then the enterprise will use their AI agent to make it themselves. So it rings a bit the bell that they already have started to do, or if they are willing to do, since we have moved the WAN on enterprise from MPLS and very complex things with internet access and so on. But then the question is, in this AI world, agent world and so on, are you already perceiving some behaviors of enterprise and multinational companies, big companies, on saying, okay, with AI, with agentic AI and so on, we will take power back from our service provider. Is this something that you are perceiving, or is it something that it's not on their agenda?
I'm not perceiving it, because I'm not perceiving that this is a reality at the moment. What I'm just thinking is that it's what the technology can enable. And look, we've heard sort of where the majority of enterprises are at. I don't think that it's necessarily going to happen with the majority of enterprises. But when you think maybe 15, 20 years down the line, things change a lot.
Sure.
And you can see that this is something that the technology could enable. But it's not something that I've actually heard. Maybe others have.
It's happening on contractual level. The amount of contracts. If you've ever been a sourcing advisor for a large multinational, the amount of contracts you have to go through and audit, like you're advising the foreign ministry, all their embassy networks and things like that. It's a pile. You get the AI to do that type of scut work, to do the summary of where the gotchas are in the contract. But I don't think we're at that point yet.
Well, we actually asked exactly that question in one of our surveys a few months ago, and the question was, well, it came after a couple of questions that we were asking enterprises about how their networks are managed now, if it was DIY or managed, and what the trend is. Yeah. And what we found for years is that the trend is slowly but steadily away from DIY and towards managed. And then we asked about flavors of managed, but that's kind of the overall trend. But then we asked, okay, forget that. Now consider these two scenarios. Networks are becoming, or will become, more intelligent, self-managing, self-healing, able to run themselves and so on. Does that make it more likely that you, whether you're kind of currently DIY or buying a managed service, will expect to be able to just deploy a network and not use a managed service from an SP because it'll run itself effectively, and maybe there's some kind of contract with a service provider to remediate if necessary, but effectively it's sort of AI-run DIY networks. And then the other scenario was, well, actually, yes, there's that, but networks, despite the best efforts of vendors and service providers, just are becoming more complex. It's partly due to the technology, partly due to how enterprises are using networks, fragmented and distributed and so on. So because of that increasing complexity, does that make it more likely that you'll use a managed service? Anyway, the figures were about 2/3, 1/3. So 2/3 of companies said, well, actually, in the future, not tomorrow, but in the future, we can see ourselves as moving away from managed services because the network will run itself, and 1/3 the other.
Thanks.